is where we discuss the possibilities.
We are looking at everybody.
How are we going to respond?
Hey guys, I'm Joe Klemczewski, founder of The Diet Doc, here with Dr. Kori Propst for the Diet Doc Life Mastery Podcast. Today we're going to be in the macro mastery category, talking about food, specifically why diets fail. So here we are, Kori. I am 25 years into my career, and as I was thinking about this topic, I have so many vivid recollections of doing things like sitting in my office. I was working as an orthopedic physical therapist. I started this little side hustle called Midwest Muscle and Performance, and I was writing comprehensive nutrition and training programs. And even back then, the very first thing on my mind was sustainability. I mean, why are people coming to me asking for nutrition programs? Why are they failing? You know, it doesn't seem like rocket science, just eat less than your body needs. But obviously there are a lot of caveats, and that's why we do what we do. So here's what happened. Flash forward 25 years, and my son, I got this great text from him late last night, and he said, "Hey, Dad, if you need a little pop culture information for your podcast, check out this new documentary on Netflix called Explain. There is a topic, why diets fail." So I thought, first of all, kudos to my son. How amazing is that to be getting little research prompts from down the DNA chain. But that's a really good point. And the great thing is, Kori, when you watch this, and anybody watches this, you're going to see that everything we teach, everything we talk about, especially as we train our Diet Doc program owners and coaches, is absolutely flat out proven. So before I get into some of that, you obviously have a tremendous amount of experience. Tell me why diets fail.
Well, let me just add first that I got started much in the same way on the psychological side, where everything that I was doing needed to be focused on sustainability. And if we were going to help people change their behavior in a positive way, then we wanted to do it in a quote unquote evidence-based way and help them to do so in a manner that was going to be enduring. So when I came on board with the Diet Doc, this just merged very nicely, and we were able to capitalize on the psychological and emotional side of sustainability coupled with the behavioral and the practical side. In my mind, and with the research that even I did as part of my dissertation, a large part of why diets fail has a lot to do with internal and external mechanisms, environmental, and then more emotional, intellectual, psychological, and even hormonal issues. I didn't study the hormonal side of things, but I did, in my research, focus on the emotional threats that people experience within their lives as they're pursuing a diet or a weight loss goal, and what those look like. And they really come down to there's ways of thinking that get in the way and create barriers. And that can boil down into different types of mindsets. There's emotional experiences that individuals have within their lives that aren't even related to the diet itself, but that occur within their relationships and emotions that they experience on the job and within their career, or that have a lot to do with injuries and physical ailments that they're experiencing. And those affect how we behave around food and how we behave and think about our goal to diet in general. So that's just it's kind of a real broad answer to your question, Joe, but it's multifaceted, and I'm wondering how they explained it in this documentary.
Yeah, well, as I should have known, you're going way deeper than the documentary, so we'll get there. I don't think what you're saying was really broad. It's foundational. It's why people fail but we're going to talk about some of those mechanisms. I want to just add a little caveat to what you said there. I was emailing a client yesterday, and just to show how true one of your mantras is when you say, oftentimes dieting doesn't have anything to do with food, or at least failing doesn't have a lot to do with food. This client of mine said, I binged last week. I just, this is what happened. And I've already been talking to her about some of these things. And I said, okay, tell me the context. You know that's going to be my question. She said, well, I was expecting to do this on Saturday, and we were going to do this whole family thing. And then my husband ditched me. He went off and did this thing. And so I was left with the kids, and I got pissed. And so I started eating cookies and ice cream. So I said, as you would note, rightfully so, Kori, it had nothing to do with the food, had nothing to do with hunger, had nothing to do with being in a calorie deficit, had nothing to do with being on a low carb or low fat diet. It was the behavior, the emotion, anger caused. It had nothing to do with food.
Right.
So, all right. So we'll put that aside for a second. I just wanted to use that.
I love this topic. Yeah. The clients who come to me, who are working with me on the mental edge side of things, when they're like, so when are we going to be talking about food? And I'm like, well, first we're going to be talking about how you think and how you feel and how you know you're feeling these things you're telling me you feel, but you can't tell me why or how. That's at that ground level right there. That's what we're going to be focusing on first.
And I want to eventually, hopefully we'll have time to mention the National Weight Control Registry, because I think there's a lot of great habits and information we can learn there. But here's what this documentary did. They looked at one of the most recent studies done by Stanford, and that they selected this study because they really wanted to know what's the best way to diet if there is one. And they thought they would only be able to figure that out if they didn't necessarily control things. They wanted to see in real life how this played out. And I like that because I've done that myself. One of the times that I studied vegetarianism as a case study, that was what I did. The first time I did it, I absolutely controlled every variable. I'm going to only have this amount of protein per day, only these types, etc.
And we don't live in a vacuum.
Right. And then the next time I said, I'm just going to eat whatever I want. I'm just going to live in the real world as a vegetarian and see how practical it was. And I think that's where you get a great deal of real life information. So this group at Stanford said, okay, you're the low fat group. You're the low carb group. Of course, that's how we divide diets, right? And so, but there were no restrictions. It's just, you guys cannot eat carbs. You guys cannot eat fat. And then we're going to see what happens. And over the course of, I think it was about 6 months. I can't recall that. But the groups looked identical in terms of when you look at the meta-analysis of results. But some people, they actually interviewed a couple friends, and one had lost like 6 pounds, one had gained 4 pounds. And they talked about their experience. And it came down to, and we've heard this before, the best kind of diet is the kind you can stick to. Because all that mattered when it came down to it, you take away all of the fancy little nuances and dictums of different diets and just say, okay, a year later, 2 years later, 10 years later, are you leaner? Are you healthier? It comes down to, like I said at the beginning, you're eating fewer calories than your body is using. And so you can get into the weeds and talk about all the great stuff that you and I love to talk about biochemically, neuroscience-wise, and all that. But here's what they came. Here's two of the factors that they isolated that I think were really important. Since the 1970s, since we've really seen an increase of obesity, the average American has added almost 600 calories a day to their diet. So you can't have a society of 300 million people eating 600 calories a day extra every day and not expect society as a whole to gain weight. Secondly, where those calories came from was that we are now snacking twice as much. So the incidence or the amount of times per day that we snack is twice high, 100% higher. So that's where all the extra calories are coming from. So go ahead.
Well, I just want to mention that, and we're not snacking on healthy foods.
Right.
So, and by healthy, I mean like clean, natural we're not going for fruits and vegetables. We're going for processed, usually higher fat, higher carbohydrate items. And the research even shows too, and taking into account the National Weight Control Registry, they've shown that the individuals who gain their weight back gravitate after they're quote unquote off the diet, they're gravitating towards, they're increasing their fat substantially post diet.
Mm-hmm. So. Absolutely. And that is something that's very difficult to not do if you're very unintentional about your diet. You have to be looking consciously, because one of the points they made in this documentary was, here you have the diet industry, $70 billion worth of commercialization trying to sell you stuff to get you leaner. Yeah. Then you have the food industry, which is much larger, doing everything they can to sell you more food. And so you have these two messages all day long. And of course, what do we want? I mean, we want what tastes good and what feels good and what's convenient. Mm-hmm. So getting back to the National Weight Control Registry, all of the demographics that show people who do succeed, because that was the whole premise of this study, I think almost probably 25 years old now and ongoing. What are some of the top 5 or so habits of people who do successfully sustain their weight loss?
So I mentioned that they keep fat relatively low in their diets post weight loss journey. So people don't get confused between diet as nutrition post program, I guess. Most of them are exercising at least an hour a day. That has become a staple in their arsenal. And to your point about choosing something that will stick to, these individuals have found exercise that they actually enjoy. So it's not that they feel obligated to do a certain something because it's going to net them these results necessarily. It's, I enjoy and value doing this activity in my life on an almost daily basis. On the psychological side of things, what has been shown, Joe, is they've adopted a new way of looking at their nutrition and almost like their lives in general, and they take a more open, curious, non-urgent, pressure-filled, really a growth sort of mindset. So they're more flexible. They exhibit a lot more behavioral flexibility. And you and I talk all the time about structured flexibility. That does not mean they're post-program saying, well, okay, I'm done now. Like, I can go back to my old habits and, engage in the same things that I did when I was gaining weight. It really is more about being very discerning. So they have what they know to be effective as part of their protocol, but they also recognize that life occurs. And so they're going to have to be able to move and shift and pivot in certain areas. Emotionally, they have learned how and practice a level of emotional intelligence and emotional regulation, especially during those times like where your client, said, I was super angry, I was pissed off, and so I just was stuffing my face with food. It's in situations like that where they've adopted and practiced different strategies like mindfulness, like deep breathing, like contacting a support person. That's another thing, is that a lot of the people in the National Weight Control Registry who have been successful in maintaining for a significant period of time, they have more friends, they have more support people. They have practiced and learned how to ask for help. And what was so interesting in my research, Joe, was that my participants knew that support was important, but they rarely would ask for it.
Right.
And they didn't know how to ask for it. So we can talk all day about how it's really important to have support and friends and family and people in our lives that, we're communicating with and sharing our goals with. But a lot of people don't know how to talk to other people. It's the communication skills that need to be built.
You need to make a note of that so that we can talk about this for an entire podcast, because that alone, the actual ability to ask for help, that's just a human barrier to any kind of connection.
Yeah, it really is.
So one of the things that I like about your response there was that emotionally and through emotional intelligence, people are more curious, more open-minded, more strength-based. I think that's exactly why over time, with a great deal of subjects, a study like this showing dichotomous methods, low carb versus low fat, on a graph, they plot identical. And here's why. I think because when you start out with a low carb diet, and ketogenic diets are the worst at compliance and all of that, and they cause the most binge eating. But if that's your goal, if your goal is no carbs, you're probably gonna end up with some carbs, but less. And so, hopefully for those who were succeeding, obviously their calories had to come down, and they moderated that. Same thing on the low fat side. You're eventually gonna have some higher fat foods and snacks and that kind of thing. And so even on the low fat side, they're going to become a little bit more moderate. And I'm guaranteeing if you looked at the absolute food intake of all of those subjects over all of that time, you're going to see that even though they started out at those polar opposite methods, they probably end up merged just to exactly the same point, especially calorie-wise. That would be indicated by the results. But the other thing that I think this shows is it goes back to your thoughts about mindset.
Yeah.
I know if I'm intentional about my eating, I'm in a phase of trying to lose a little weight or do something healthily, just trying to, create some better habits. You do have to stop and think about that throughout the day. Before this podcast, I was, it was about 3 hours, past breakfast. I was hungry, and I thought, man, it's time to eat. I'm going to go get something to eat. I thought, well, wait a second. I'm going to do this first. And then, okay, my hunger kind of went away. And I'm like, well, now that I'm not hungry, I'm going to do this next. Pretty soon, an hour and a half, maybe 2 went by. I was like, wow, I actually stretched out that time between meals. And that gets to the heart of this study, is that we just simply need more time between meals to use up the food we've already put in our body, possibly tap into some body fat stores to bridge that gap between meals. And that's how you get that 600 calorie surplus that we've added in the last 50 years back down to normal.
So would you say, Joe, because over the course of these decades of time, is that 3 or 4 decades, there's more fast food, there's more snack foods available. It's like in our last podcast, we talked about, immediate gratification. There's maybe people have more expendable income to put toward food. Would you say that's contributing to those extra calories being consumed? It's always in our faces.
You just made me think. I don't know if you recall, when I did my second doctorate in health education, my dissertation was on how to solve the obesity epidemic among our adolescents. And at this time, I think this was back in the early 2000s, Congress committed a study to be done. And an amazing group, just different cohorts of science agencies came together. And it was 12 or 13 specific areas, almost spokes in a wheel, of things contributing. It wasn't just one thing. We couldn't say, well, this is it. This is, McDonald's is making us all fat. Yeah. But things like 86% of kids' TV programming, 86% is food and snack commercials, trying to get them to get high sugar, high fat snacks. Like you talked about, food deserts, lower socioeconomic residents just don't have access to healthier foods, but they have a McDonald's on every corner. You have more parents working more hours. You have less structured activity in schools. I mean, you could go around that circle, and it's endless as far as the layers and spokes that feed into this. But it still comes down to that strategy of how are we going to bring these calories down? As you said, how are we behaviorally going to structure our day to make sure we're living the life we want to live?
Choice.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you were going to boil it down to one thing, it would maybe be the question of what choices am I making? And are they in my service if this is a goal of mine to be healthy and lean and vital and energetic? So,
well, we will definitely have to pick apart all of those different topics. I think each one deserves some great analytical study, and then we can give some great practical advice as well. So I appreciate you chiming in with this topic, Kori, as always. And for you guys out there listening and watching, we appreciate that and want you to continue to like and share. Give us some feedback. Tell us some topics you want us to cover, and we will continue to do that for you. So thank you guys, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.